Great. Mr. Norsini, you will communicate with them, and we will try to have them at the next meeting.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. 2020 budget discussion, Mr. Zinkowski and Mr. White. Bob, you need your mic.
Sorry. I'd ask Ian if he could bring up on the screen slide presentation that we have. There we go. All right, we talk about administration recommendations for the 2020 budget. We recommend the board schedule special meetings in 2020 to include the following: set board of commissioners goals, priorities for the organization that will help drive a lot of the performance measures of that particular item as it relates to the budget. Ask that the board schedule, that they would recommend the board schedule special meetings for the following items: to evaluate the projects that were submitted to the board earlier during the work sessions, as well as being submitted directly to you. At the October 7th in 2019, we'd ask that you meet to discuss those. Recommend the board schedule meetings to evaluate the additional staffing requests in 2020 that was presented to you during the October 28th special meeting. We'd recommend the board schedule meetings to include the development of township-wide parks and facilities and maintenance and improvements plan that would be for the board to look at. And the suggestion would be that the Parks Board to review and give recommendations in 2020. They've done a lot of work on this so far, and it would seem like a natural fit. So we'd recommend the possibility that they would look at that. Suggest CARFAC review and make a recommendation on the following two items regarding a permanent funding plan for capital projects, and evaluate and review the sanitary sewer system. Suggest the Shade Tree Commission review and make recommendations. We had started to discuss the item regarding the street trees in the right-of-way of the township, that Shade Tree would discuss that and make a recommendation to the board as they gather a lot of information in regards to that particular item. We'd also look at evaluating the possibility of dedicated millage for the following groups, which is the Radnor Memorial Library, as well as all the community groups serving the Radnor residents. That would be something that the board could consider. And we are recommending that the board adopt additional millage to cover the fire operations serving the Radnor community, and those entail the Radnor Fire Company, the Radnor Ambulance, Bryn Mawr Fire, and Broomall Fire would be all inclusive on that, and the added millage rate would be 0.3770.
All right, so for my part, just updating the board and the public on the things that have changed since we presented at the October 21st Board of Commissioner meeting. During that presentation, we had a baseline general fund operating statement, and what I've done is we've labeled what those numbers were back on the 21st versus what they are today. You'll see for the most part revenues are the same, just a real slight reduction in some of the estimates for the Act 511 taxes. But really where the differences are is on the expense side, specifically in payroll and related. There's roughly a $461,000 reduction. That is due to the renewal costs for the health care, which was part of the consent agenda that the board adopted earlier tonight. By agreeing to a 2-year renewal, we will realize a lower cost in 2020, and at the same time receive or realize growth protection in 2021, where the rate cannot increase by higher than 3% in 2021. Whereas if we just did our typical annual 1-year renewals that we've done since we've been part of the healthcare trust, we would have slightly higher renewal costs for 2020, and there would be no protection for 2021. It would be whatever the trust passed along to all of its members. So that's the biggest change in what's driving that number down. When we take a look at other operating...
Hold on, Bill, before we leave that, this is the issue I wanted to understand earlier. We were going to do it on new business, but I guess since you just went through it, it's probably the best time. So explained again, if we sign up for 2 years, we get more of a benefit than if we sign up for 1 year, or we get more of a reduction, you're saying? Or
In year-
less of a reduction?
In year one, we get more of a reduction, so greater savings in 2020, in the 2020 renewal. And then in year two, there is a cap on the amount that the healthcare costs could go up. So we get that protection as well. So by doing the 2-year renewal, there's a benefit in 2020 and in 2021.
Well, if it goes up, but it went down, what if it goes down?
We would, if it's
And then
less than.
then we committed to the 2-year price?
No, in year two, if it's less than 3%, we get whatever the actual renewal amount is. If it's 1%, it's 1. If it's less than 1, we'll realize that as well.
But you said that it went down this year.
Which is this year? Are we talking 2020?
2020.
Yeah, so the decision was a 1-year renewal or commit to a 2-year renewal. In either scenario for 2020, health insurance costs were going to go down. If we commit to the 2-year renewal, they will be cheaper than they would if we committed to the 1-year renewal. And it's in the legislative summary that's part of the board packet.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank you, Mr. White, that what you laid out in the legislative summary is very explanatory. You gave us all of the information we needed, as well as all of the dollar amounts and what we'll be saving. So thank you very much.
Well, but again, the issue is if it goes down again next year, we will be paying the same for 2 years, so we won't realize the savings from the healthcare trust if it goes down. Also, what went down, what caused it to go down for 2020? And explain, we had a net decrease of 10.53 is what you're showing versus a net decrease of 7.53%. So what's driving those two, and what's in it for the trust? Why would the trust do this if it's going to hurt the trust as far as its ability to pay claims?
Well, I can't speak for the trust, other than to say that I'm sure whatever, the rates that we are quoted during our renewal process are much the same as RHM on the sewer side. It's the trust forecasting what their claims experience is going to be and allocating it based on the size and the number of lives that we're insuring with our group. And then obviously that's aggregated by all of the members. So what's driving one number versus the other, I cannot go into detail on. I don't have that information.
Well,
all I know is that they've quoted us these amounts for renewal.
What drove it to go down for 2020? Healthcare costs have been going up around the country. Why is Delaware Valley
Again, I cannot speak for why Delaware Trust is realizing those savings.
Okay, well,
Don't
all
we
right.
realize
just
savings by being- it's the
bear with me, bear with me. So, but again, suppose, all right, I'll accept that it went down, and you're gonna take the 10.53% reduction for a 2-year commitment versus a 7.53 if we just did a 1-year commitment.
Yes.
Right.
There's an important element to that.
Right,
though,
so,
that
but
you didn't
what, if
mention.
it's a 2-year agreement, if it goes down again another 10% next year, we won't be able to realize that.
We will realize that. The protection is that it will not grow by more than 3%. If the 2021 renewal is less than that 3%, whether it be 1% increase or a 10% decrease, we are eligible to realize those savings.
Well, then what's the commitment with the 2 years then?
I'm not sure why they're offering. It's the first time in the 10 years that I've been here with Radnor that they've offered this. But they have, and it's exactly as I'm explaining it. We talked to them directly about it. We asked these same questions, and this is where they're at.
It doesn't seem like there's any benefit for the trust to do this, though. It's only downside.
Except maybe not to lose folks, because there are competitors out there. There's a couple startups, and I think they're trying to, again, I'm speculating based on what I'm seeing, and I'm not speaking for the trust, but if you're trying to retain your clients, that's a way to do it.
So who are they losing clients to? Is there somebody who's reducing costs even more?
I don't know if they're reducing costs more. I don't have that information.
Well, what's
It's just-
driving them losing clients then?
We will bring the Delaware Trust in, and they can present to the board, and they can answer these questions directly. I am not their representative.
When,
I don't
when a
have their
deal seems too
information.
good to be true, I'm going to be skeptical
I
about
think
it. So
the-
that's,
I think
I
the
would
best
love it. It would be
answer-
great if
okay.
you brought them in.
I think the best
you know,
answer
if
is
we
to
had a
have them come.
private meeting, that's fine, but if you want to bring them in so we can understand exactly what's happening, what's driving, where they're going to cap upside and then give us all the downside if it costs go down again and still have a 2-year commitment. It seems,
Just remember, the way the trust operates is that there's no profit motive. 100% of the premiums going into the trust are used to pay the claims. If the claims are less than that amount, which they are every year, those are returned back to the clients through the rate stabilization. So there would be no reason for them to hang on to the money or charge one rate, realize greater savings, and then run with it, because they are a representative of all their clients. They're not a profit-driven entity.
well, then why they care about keeping, so I want to understand their business, because then it shouldn't be so important if people come in and out, you know, why they want a 2-year commitment, and then they're limiting the top's upside, but not downside. Also, our expense for 2020 is going to be $4,080,000 for healthcare. Is that what the number is?
That sounds right, yep. Yes.
$4 million,
I don't have it memorized. It's a $4 million amount,
and that's for all 126
plus retiree.
plus retirees, and how many are on that?
A little over 100, like 115 retirees.
And that includes both unions, or all unions, or just
The
the 100?
retirees?
Yeah, the 100 that are retirees.
Yeah, it
That's rate versus.
FOP, yes.
FOP.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
So with the savings realized, that's one of the big numbers that changed this payroll and related estimate. We also went back in and changed some overtime requests and an assumption on vacant position refills. The next category under other operating, the biggest change there, we decreased it by $340,000 and change. There were some contractual service requests in a couple of the departments that we took out, and we'll just have to wait until a future budget cycle when revenues will support increases for contractual services. The last category then is on the capital side. This is the departmental capital, the fleet, and the operating equipment. There were several requests for equipment that we reprioritized and moved to future years. And not so much on the fleet side, but on the equipment side. So there's a roughly $300,000 or $260,000 in savings there. So the impact to the net revenue is that in October we were looking at about $265,000. We were aiming for roughly $1.2 million and change. That wasn't an accident because we were trying to find a way to reincorporate back in funding for the library and the various community organizations at amounts that were consistent with prior years or with the slight cost of living type of increase. And this recommendation of rebuilding these back into the general fund budget numbers is in concert with the recommendation of funding the fire company through millage. Obviously, if the fire company discussion goes, if the board wants to go in a different direction there's another $1.2 million roughly needed to fund the fire company requests. So real quickly then, with regard to capital, on the general capital side, this is the infrastructure. These are the signals, the sidewalks, the traffic improvements, parks, trails, and those types of capital projects. There's no new funding included for next year. Instead, administratively, we'll focus on making sure that we install the capital items that were part of the $7.3 million that the board borrowed earlier this year. which did include several projects, several large projects. So it's not like nothing will get done, but we'll focus on the 7.3. For sanitary sewer, there's no new project funding. The 2020 projects will consist of spending down the remainder of the 2018 emergency sewer bonds, which is really the Skunk Hollow trunk line that's going on currently. And again, to note, if emergency repairs are needed, if it's a large enough one, the general fund will have to pay. And we can get in a little bit more detail about that at the next meeting. And then, as the manager recommended with regard to identifying and funding projects, I just wanted to point out or emphasize that with the cycle, if there are projects on the stormwater front that the board would like to get going on immediately, in almost any scenario, it's going to require some sort of financing. Just keep in mind that with the financing, we can build in the expense in 2021 or a later year, at which time the rate could be adjusted. So if we don't include any rate changes immediately for stormwater, that doesn't mean we can't get going with projects if the board wishes. And then finally, with regard to the remaining calendar, we have a meeting scheduled for next Monday, a week from tonight, to finalize. Hopefully at that meeting we could finalize the millage discussion, as well as the sewer rent and stormwater fee for next year, and then review any capital projects to be included that the board would like to see. And that's building off of the capital project lists that were distributed about a week and a half ago. And then finally, the November 25th meeting is slated for the introduction of the budget-related ordinances. And then at the December 9th meeting, those ordinances would be adopted along with any other related budget legislation, which includes the wage and salary schedule and any others that come out of our meetings. So that is the update for tonight.
So I thought we talked about a separate millage for the library. Bob had it before you came on, he talked about separate millage. Is that part of this or is that not part of this?
So what we went back and did is we recognized the fact that the October meeting, the board was presented with a lot of items that were unfunded and dollar amounts that were they were unrealistic and to fix right away. So in going back and coming up with this recommendation, we tried to identify incremental fixes. So for 2020, or a decision during this budget cycle, the millage for the fire companies would be added, and then in a future year, consider additional millage then to fund the library and other community organizations. One of the reasons we came to that is we also know that we've talked about capital and our struggles to have a sustained capital funding program. If revenues remain consistent, not this year, not 2020, but in 2021, if revenues remain consistent and the library is funded outside of the current millage, then that should free up current revenues that can be used to help start funding our capital program. So that can, again, we're trying to find incremental fixes and do this over multiple years instead of taking a look at a list that has a huge dollar amount and asking you, the board, to sift through that.
For 2020, though, the millage for the library and those other organizations, basically separate 501c3s, will be part of the budget, not separate millage, is what you're saying.
That is exactly right. Yeah, we were through the healthcare, reducing some of the requests on contractual services in the operating budgets. That's where we were able to reduce budgets administratively to get to about 1.2 million in net revenue, which that money would be used to fund the library and community organizations. And the new millage would fund the fire companies.
The new millage is about 9% increase, as I calculated it. I thought that we talked about 1.2 million, you mentioned the number. I thought the fire company was talking about $250,000. Is it now 1.3 million? Is that what the number was?
I believe the 250,000 that the fire company mentioned at the special meeting was in addition to what they're currently getting.
So, but it seems a jump to go to 1.3 million and a 9% increase from that.
It includes the other fire departments as well.
Yeah, it includes the township's contribution to Bryn Mawr and Broomall, as well as the capital contributions to Radnor Fire and Broomall Fire. So it's the total amount that Radnor currently provides to the fire companies, both operating and capital.
And that would be, and that would be separate millage.
That's what we're proposing, yes.
Bill, I have a question here. And I'm considering with the fire, first of all, I think that we need a signed pilot resolution. The board needs to come up with a resolution and ask certain nonprofits for a pilot. Because fires is a big part of our shortfall. So if I choose to vote for this, and I don't know which way I'm going, why is there a millage that's just based on the taxpayer? Why is this not a fee? So we could ask some of the nonprofits that won't help us with the pilot, why don't we make a fee, and then they're required to do it. So granted, while we can't, we don't get to write it off on our taxes, we'd have to weigh the formula. Well, you know, it's a 30% discount versus more money from institutions that own large parcels of land.
It's so, in talking about establishing a fee, the difficulty is identifying a fair base to apply the fee, because you can't just apply the fee to a certain group of folks, like nonprofits. The same fee would have to apply to all the users of the companies.
Sure.
So you'd end up charging that fee to the residents as well.
The residents as well as paying for it. I'm just asking for additional help from all the landowners, whether you're nonprofit, you're residential, you're institutional, your business, to chip in via a fee as opposed to adding it onto the tax. You
Not
understand what
sure
I'm saying, correct?
No,
So, Bill, if we carve out the fire department or the emergency services, and that becomes its own millage, we would take that and put that in a fund, a separate fund, so that money would sit there, we'd be able to see it coming in and out. It wouldn't go just into our general fund, it wouldn't be commingled, it would go into its own fund, correct?
yes, that would be the recommendation, to treat it that way.
Okay, so if we had that, its own separate fund, is there so to Sean's point, can we consider, maybe we can't consider that in this moment, but moving forward, a way that we can in some way recoup some funding from the other groups that are benefiting from the services of fire, and then we can see that come in and go into a fund, like the stormwater fee and whatnot.
Sure, to the extent we have pilots, absolutely. That could be deposited in the same special fund and distributed to the fire companies, or those could be made directly to the fire companies, separate of going through the township at all.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Let me back up. Okay, so we don't have a pilot. It's unlikely that we're going to get a pilot, okay? But I think that should be a priority of this board, is to get a resolution. We can figure out what is a fair amount and vote on it, and whether or not these institutions want to contribute, fine. Now, that's a separate issue. Now, I'm looking, and what I'm trying to say is we have a sewer fee, which we can't write off our taxes. That applies to basically anyone that uses water that goes through our lines. Same thing with stormwater, based on whatever metric that is. So, the size of your lot. So, based on the size of your lot or whatever, your property value, then there should be a fee that would go to EMS and fire, et cetera.
Or you could use square footage of buildings under
Yeah,
roof.
Yes, square foot, whatever that formula is, but there's a a large percentage of entities that are not, that use our fire, that use our ambulance, that have ambulances that may go to their special events, that do not pay $1. And if we make this a millage and a tax, we will not see any contribution from them. So why are we doing it as a tax and not a fee?
And again, as a fee, for instance, buildings under roof, square footage under roof, which is part of all these, every property's going to be reassessed. Even the exempt parcels will have a square footage of under roof. That could be used as the basis for the fee, perhaps. It's rationally related to a fire expense, and something to kick around with the legal team.
You can also look at ambulance, too. I mean, if you have a dorm, for instance, and you have 1,000 people there, and you use their ambulance, I mean, there's a million different ways to cut it, but yeah, I think that that needs, I guess, getting back to, why are we looking at it as a tax and not a fee? That's my question.
Yeah, I think that our solicitor's going to have to help us with the legalities of it. I mean, for the same reason we don't charge a fee for police, and for the same reason why we can charge a fee for the sewer and stormwater is, again, there's no base to apply the fee to that is uniform across all users. How do you charge for the opportunity or the availability to dial 911?
Well, it just sounds contradictory to me when you're saying you can't do it, what's the charge for 911, but there is a charge for when you call 911 and the fire company comes out, or you have an ambulance comes out. It just,
Sean,
it doesn't make sense
Can I
to me.
let me just weigh in a little bit on the issue. Fees that the township charges have to be based on something that the township is doing, some township service. Not what fire company's doing, not what the EMS is doing. They are not township. So fees, like the stormwater fee, is based on what the township provides for maintaining stormwater, sewer, water, those utilities. So they're fees. Townships try to generate revenue for fire companies and EMS, sometimes put it on the ballot, sometimes enact real estate taxes. And that gets dedicated to fire company. Some of the codes say in a second-class township, you can put 2 mills for fire. If you want to exceed that, you got to put it on the ballot. Now, you don't have those limitations in Radnor Township because you're a home rule municipality, but that is spread equally across the board based on real estate. So you're using fees and taxes interchange. They're not the same thing.
I know they're not the same thing. Again, I'm not trying to be argumentative. I'm just saying you have, just what you said. When the fire company isn't going to get a call and say, oh, well, and the police aren't going to get a call from 911 saying, oh, well, because you don't contribute, we're not going to come. They're going to come regardless, and they should pay regardless.
Well, the fee is the fee that the person that's using the EMS gets, right? They get charged a fee. Their insurance carrier gets charged a fee. Fire company doesn't, police doesn't charge fees because we can't.
John,
I just see that it's an inequitable split.
what's the precedence for establishing a fire service fee based on square foot of buildings under roof on each parcel? There's no precedent, so is there any precedent against implementing something like that?
on, John.
you still have to go back with the fee. Who's providing the service for the fee, Rich, in that scenario?
The township is providing the service to its constituents through, it's a subcontract or it's a delegation to the fire companies. And we are passing through that fee.
But it's not the township providing the service. I mean,
It-
go
it's-
back to the base.
It's like subrogation. It's as if the township was providing it through, we're providing it through
Very
our
tenuous.
contracts with others.
Very tenuous, very tenuous. Problem.
It is tenuous, but I'm suggesting that we evaluate how tenuous that relationship is.
We can look at it, but,
Yeah, I would
you know,
agree.
fees are, in this state, fees have to be related to a service that the township provides.
And in the alternative, it will be an additional assessment of about 9% or more on current ratepayers, and it would not reach the nonprofit ratepayers. So,
If it's a real estate.
because it'll be on a taxable real estate. So that's what the concern is, to pass 9% to all of the residents and not to all of the institutions that might be also using the service in greater amounts than the residents.
I mean, yeah, I have to echo what Rich is saying. I mean, we all have to be kidding ourselves to think that the fire isn't really an extension of our government. We support them. I don't know what percentage of the budget we help, but it's got, what is it, 50%? Well, how much more? How much? It's, so you're a $4 million entity? Okay. But it's still a large percentage, and again, it's inequitable, and I will echo what Rich says, that just because it hasn't been done, I think we need to think outside the box, because every year we have more and more and more fees and costs, and it's the taxpayers that get stuck with it.
Alternatively, you said we could put it on the ballot. What would we put on the ballot?
A dedicated real estate tax for fire or EMS.
Okay, so that way we would get buy-in from the constituents. However, it still wouldn't address the issue of reaching the exempt parcels.
Correct. We have the system we have in this state. If you can qualify under the tests that have been laid out by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to meet that charitable exemption, you get it. And to enact a fee to somehow get the same revenue because they're tax exempt, you know, then you're targeting that particular group.
If Penn decided they were not going to, if Penn complies with their agreement and they do not file for an exemption, would a special millage for fire be part of that exception, or promise not to file for an exemption, or would that not be part of the taxable base for Penn?
Yeah, I don't think there's any limitations on that agreement with Penn. I mean, you know, they are paying full real estate taxes, whatever they are,
And that would include a fire assessment.
correct, on real estate.
That's your considered opinion right now, so we'll remember that going forward.
Great.
So is it
won't change.
worth it if we are,
But I wonder if theirs will, though.
if we're considering a dedicated tax in order to support our fire and EMS, is it worth it to start having a conversation with the nonprofit entities and say, you know, this is something we're looking at, our taxpayers are going to be, you know, contributing in this way, how would you be willing to join with us? I mean, I know they're against the idea of a pilot, you know, to go to our general fund or whatever, but this is specific, it's very dedicated, so if, you know, we've got the millage for the real estate residents, then do we say, can you equal that? And as you said, Bill, is it, you know, does it come to us? I don't know, or does it go directly to the fire companies?
One of the items is understanding that the township cannot just adopt a resolution or ordinance, say you will pay a pilot. It has to be agreed upon by both parties. It's something that we can look at. I've had discussions with one of the universities, and they said they would consider it if we could quantify what those expenses are, what the impacts are to that particular entity, which I think, working with the fire company and with our staff, we could probably do that. But that's something that we cannot get done in the next month or so. There will be time for that. So yes, that is something that, if the board says, yes, we would like to pursue that, we will work closely with the fire companies then to try to qualify and quantify exactly what are being asked for. So that would be one of the items that we'd look at.
Bob, yeah, I propose a resolution to ask for a pilot, and we can come up with a formula. If the nonprofits don't want to pay for it, that's up to them. But we are at a point where this isn't working, and the writing on the wall is this hasn't been working, and it won't work, and we're going to get deeper and deeper and deeper in the hole. And each year we do this budget, it is an issue of trying to jam a round hole through a square peg, and there's a lot of stuff on the fly, and things get cut, and it's unsustainable going forward. Our budgets are unsustainable going forward.
Well, and I think that's one of the things we're proposing, because a very important service that is provided here in the township is fire and ambulance, very important. And to put it into its own separate millage, it eliminates that ability to have fire every year determine what are we going to get this year, because they have to start planning. And knowing that it's the volunteer service, and anywhere you look or you read, you know that the volunteer service is shrinking. And anything we can do now to help support them and provide that separated millage, they can start planning for that. It's something that, it's been a long-term issue, and I think it lays on, now unfortunately you have to deal with a lot of these items now because you can't kick the can any further down, but I think it segments it out to where people know that this is what I am paying for specifically, is for that fire and ambulance service that is outstanding, that is provided to this community.
So as we do that, our taxes are still going to go up. Other entities aren't paying anything. So if, I don't know what, if
Sean,
we're going to have an increase of, and you can talk millage or via stormwater, which is just a de facto tax, it's going up, I don't know, 5, 7, 10%, and it's going to have to happen every year, and it's not sustainable. And it is the taxpayer, it is the property taxpayer, the business taxpayer that gets hit with this. And it is unsustainable, it is unfair, and it's really hard for me. I voted for it last year. You're going to get pushed in a corner this year, and every year the majority is going to get pushed into voting for something, and it's going to be clips at 10, 12%. And that is, we need to think outside of the box.
Well, I think we have looked outside the box and presented different items, and we'll continue to keep doing those types of things. For us to think that a pilot of whatever the universities or not-profits are going to pay is going to solve our problems, they aren't going to save our problems. But as of one of the large institutions here are willing to have that conversation with us now, if we could go to them with costs and say, this is really the impacts, go there with the calls, they said they will consider that. And I think that is a huge movement on these organizations to say we are willing to entertain that.
So I've heard that an institution would help with the sidewalk they didn't. I've heard an institution that would.
Sean. Okay. So I think we've heard the desire that there be a conversation, that we start some conversations with the nonprofit entities that utilize the services. Eamon, is that information that you can work with our staff and provide, that you guys have that kind of broken out with regards to the cost associated with servicing, some of the nonprofit institutions? I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Before, as Amy comes up, Bob, I think we voted to a resolution to impose or to request a pilot from the agreements, from the 501c from the institutions probably like 3 or 4 years ago.
We did.
And we didn't get the vote, I don't think, to pass it.
I think there was some discussion in which we would do that. However, there were other negotiations going on contrary to what we were trying to do that I think hurt that scenario. I think now we have the institutions that are willing to listen and willing to understand that. So I think working closely with the fire department and staff here, Bill and his department, I think we'll be able to put that information together that they will consider, because I think they realize they are impacted. You know, there are responses that go to all the non-for-profits. So I think us putting that detail together should be very, very helpful. in them
Well, and I
making
think the
decisions.
township making this move to create, if we decide to go this route, to create the dedicated millage, they have to see that, we are in making the investment, that we see this as something important, we as a township. We're not kidding around. Like, this is a serious issue.
Absolutely.
So I think, if we can go to them with that and have calm, cool heads with some real information behind it, having those discussions, it might be beneficial. Amen. Thank you.
No problem. Good evening. Just in response to your question or inquiry, we certainly can provide information. We previously worked with the staff in the past, in particular with the colleges, understanding what the call volume impact is for each of those schools. We looked at Villanova's EMS statistics today. As of 2 o'clock this afternoon, we've had 189 ambulance calls, just to Villanova alone. I think we're happy to hear this conversation going on as far as it pertains to Radnor, Broomall, and Bryn Mawr. I think the biggest thing is this is continuing to be fleshed out, is that even with the township potentially adopting a tax and having that in place, the township is still going to be benefiting from a lot of volunteers continuing to put time in to serve the community as both firefighters and EMTs. As the manager mentioned, the volunteer shortage and problem is not germane to certain areas of the country or in Pennsylvania. It's affecting everybody. We've done a decent job at the 3 fire companies that service Radnor Township in trying to slow that down and entice people to volunteer for their community and here in Radnor Township. But as I said before, understand that, as Commissioner Farley pointed out, it is a scary thing to think about. These increases of money, it is a big deal. We're not going backwards. Having a good plan, the ability to plan in the future, as the manager mentioned, the ability to sit down with you all at the table and steward this money is going to be very important. But the continued investment, especially as it pertains to having the paid staff, is not going away. And yes, it gives the angina, it's a pain in the butt, but that is something that needs to be attacked vigorously, and a good plan needs to be laid out for the future. Because again, we're on the same plateau as the police go as far as level of importance when it comes to first responders in the community, and that's how this needs to be looked at. But again, understand, even with this, you're still going to have a good group of volunteers that are still going to be responding to calls and not collecting a salary or benefits and saving taxpayers a lot of money. So, I mean, it's something just not to lose sight of as we're continuing to have this discussion.
Thank you, Eamon. I appreciate that. Does anyone have, since we dragged Eamon to the podium, does anyone have any questions that are,
Yeah, I have a question.
is it respectful?
All my questions are respectful. They're respectful to the township in the sense that it's our money, and we should want to know where it's going to. What is your budget, Eamon? Wayne's budget?
Our budget right now will just be under
Right.
$2 million
Okay.
for the current budget year.
And our donation or our chip in, I don't know what,
It counts for almost 40% of
for
our budget.
40%.
Correct.
Okay, so I believe that we're fair enough stakeholders. That's not to you, but to everybody. And where we, not to the fire, but to the community, where it's important. It's important that these, you said how many ambulance calls to the colleges?
To Villanova, 180.
Well, the college, yeah, okay, but
Yeah, well,
Villanova,
I mean,
okay,
no,
sure.
it wasn't because of this meeting tonight. We were just looking at statistics
Mm-hmm.
for the month and doing our normal reports for the year. And Villanova, just 189 calls as of this afternoon for
As of-
EMS responses.
For the month?
For year-to-date,
Year to,
year-to-date.
okay, and what's the cost per call? That'll cost you guys?
It varies. Typically, you're looking, your average ambulance calls between $600 and $800
Okay,
is
and
your
what,
average.
and what percent do you recoup of that? So what is, so 800, so say 700 times what?
Yeah, I mean,
198 calls?
as far as what we're recouping on typical calls between collections and regular billing cycle, you're looking around 70% or a little bit greater
So about, so it's
return.
about 138,000, we'll say 140,000 is what you would lay out for all those ambulance calls. And-
Correct, yes.
And what percent? You said not all of it gets paid?
Well, it depends on your payer mix that we talked about in previous meetings. So if we're looking at a nursing facility where we can't bill above a certain amount because people are on Medicaid or Medicare, that's different than a college where if someone's a self-payer or they're on commercial insurance, and commercial insurance reimburses different rates depending if it's a basic life support call or an advanced life support call.
Okay.
So, I mean, we can, again, I can sit
Yeah, no,
offline
yeah,
with
that's
you.
fine.
But
Sure, just so-
it's not as clean as you may think. There's
yeah,
nuance
I'm
with the
sure.
system and where
Just-
you're
yeah,
responding.
a couple more questions. So, their football games, do you send an ambulance to their football games, or is that?
Which
Villanova-
ones?
Villanova.
No.
Okay, so that's their ambulance?
Yeah, sometimes they'll ask us to come up to help with an event, whether it's a soccer game, a field hockey tournament, something of that
Okay,
nature.
and-
Typically, hold on, please let me answer. Radnor Middle School, Valley Forge Military Academy, we do standbys at those places. We have agreements set up with them, so we are charging for the standby services being there, even if it's with a volunteer crew. We are charging for that. Typically, if it's something with the Special Olympics, because it's Special Olympics, we do that, for pro bono, because it's Special Olympics. But typically, we are charging if there's a standby occurring, which is not atypical for EMS services doing that in the area.
Okay, so if there is a special event, then, and you guys are there, you are billing them and?
Correct.
Okay.
And we have a fee schedule that we advertise, and the same would go if we do a fireworks standby, like St. David's, it's two different. St. David's, we do a fireworks standby for them, and we bill them for the fire truck being there, probably for the safety of the spectators there. I think it's July 4th, and they do theirs.
Okay.
Anything else? Eamon, thank you for letting us put you on the spot.
No problem.
Appreciate it.
Yep, thank you.
Okay. So we'll continue this discussion next week, and we'll be upstairs next week, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, does anyone else have any other questions before we end this topic? Okay. All right, moving on.